The summer sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the newly reopened fairground. Laughter and cheerful music drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of popcorn and cotton candy. Families and friends roamed the grounds, their faces lit with delight and anticipation. Among them was the Carson family, eager to experience the fair's wonders after hearing about its grand reopening. Mark and Sarah Carson strolled hand in hand, their two children, Emily and Jack, skipping ahead with boundless excitement. The fairground was a kaleidoscope of color and sound, a stark contrast to the quiet suburban life they led. It was a spontaneous decision to visit, one sparked by a billboard that promised thrills and joy just an hour's drive away. "Can we go on the Ferris wheel first?" Emily pleaded, her eyes wide with wonder as she pointed at the towering structure that loomed over the fairground. "Let's save that for later," Mark replied, ruffling her hair. "We have all evening." As they wandered deeper into the fairground, they passed by a variety of attractions. A ring toss booth where prizes hung temptingly out of reach, a carousel with painted horses that seemed to gallop in slow motion, and a row of food stalls offering every treat imaginable. Everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect, as if the fairground was trying too hard to mask something beneath its gleaming surface. Sarah glanced around, feeling a slight unease she couldn't quite place. "Do you remember hearing anything about this place before?" she asked Mark. "I feel like it has a history." Mark shrugged. "Probably just another fairground that closed down and reopened. Happens all the time." Unbeknownst to them, the Carson family was not the only newcomers that day. Lingering just beyond the reach of the light-hearted festivities were figures only partially seen, their presence felt rather than observed. Whispers seemed to ride the breeze, merging with the distant echoes of laughter, creating an unsettling harmony. As the sun dipped further, the family found themselves standing before the Ferris wheel, now glowing with 1,000 twinkling lights. "All right, let's give it a try," Mark said, earning cheers from Emily and Jack. They climbed into the swaying carriage, and the ride began its ascent. The fairground stretched out below, a patchwork of lights and shadows. Emily and Jack pressed their faces against the glass, enthralled by the view. Halfway up, the Ferris wheel jolted to a halt. The lights flickered and a hush fell over the fairground. Mark looked around, trying to spot an operator, but there was no one in sight. The cheerful music that had been playing moments before was replaced by an eerie silence. "Must be a technical issue," Mark said, though his voice betrayed his own unease. Then, faint at first, a whisper reached their ears, growing louder with each passing second. It spoke of a time long ago, of a tragedy that had befallen the fairground. The voice was mournful, filled with a sorrow that seemed to seep into their bones. "Do you hear that?" Sarah asked, her face pale. Mark nodded, his grip tightening on the safety bar. "We should get off this ride as soon as it starts moving again." The Ferris wheel creaked back to life, and they descended slowly. Once they were back on solid ground, Mark hurried them away from the ride. The children, sensing their parents' tension, stayed close. As they moved further into the fairground, Sarah spotted a man in a long coat and top hat standing by a booth. His eyes seemed to follow them, a knowing smile playing on his lips. She shuddered and looked away, but the feeling of being watched persisted. "Let's check out the haunted house," Jack suggested, trying to lighten the mood. Mark exchanged a glance with Sarah. "All right, let's stay close." They approached the entrance to the haunted house, its facade adorned with Gothic arches and grotesque statues. The air grew colder, and the shadows deepened. As they stepped inside, the door creaked shut behind them, sealing them in with whatever secrets the fairground had been hiding for years. Inside the haunted house, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and mildew. Dim, flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the sounds of distant, disembodied whispers filled the corridors. The Carson family huddled together, their footsteps echoing on the creaky floorboards. The haunted house was a labyrinth of narrow hallways and small, cramped rooms. As they ventured deeper, the unsettling feeling of being watched intensified. Emily clung to her father's hand, while Jack tried to put on a brave face but kept glancing over his shoulder. "Look at that," Sarah said, pointing to an old portrait hanging crookedly on the wall. The painting depicted a group of carnival workers from a bygone era. Their faces were solemn, almost mournful, and their eyes seemed to follow the family as they moved. "I don't like this place," Emily whispered. "Can we leave?" "Just a little further," Mark reassured her. "It's all part of the fun." As they turned a corner, they entered a room decorated like an old circus tent. The faded stripes of red and white fabric draped from the ceiling, and ancient posters advertising long-forgotten shows were pinned to the walls. In the center of the room stood an old-fashioned Ferris wheel model, its tiny carriages swaying gently as if moved by an unseen hand. A sudden chill swept through the room and the lights flickered again. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the temperature dropped noticeably. The Ferris wheel model began to spin slowly, its movements accompanied by a creaking sound that echoed through the house. "Let's get out of here," Sarah said, her voice tinged with fear. "This isn't fun anymore." As they hurried back through the narrow corridors, they could hear footsteps behind them, growing louder and closer. Panic set in and they quickened their pace, only to find themselves back in the same circus tent room, as if the house itself was playing tricks on them. "This can't be happening," Mark muttered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Suddenly, the door to the room slammed shut, and the Ferris wheel model spun faster. The whispers coalesced into a single, mournful voice that filled the room. "They must know. They must remember." The temperature plummeted, and a dense fog began to fill the room. Through the mist, they saw ghostly figures taking shape. The spectral forms of carnival workers, their faces etched with sorrow and pain, stared at the Carsons with hollow eyes. "Please let us go," Sarah pleaded, clutching Emily and Jack tightly. One of the apparitions stepped forward, a tall man in a ringmaster's outfit, his eyes filled with a sadness that transcended time. "You must understand," he said, in a voice that seemed to echo from another era. "We are bound to this place by the tragedy that occurred. Only by remembering can you free us." The room began to spin, the fog swirling around them, and the Carsons felt a disorienting sensation, as if they were being pulled through time. When the fog cleared, they found themselves standing on the fairground, but it was different. The colors were muted, and the cheerful atmosphere was replaced with an air of impending doom. They were no longer alone. A crowd had gathered, their faces pale and anxious, all eyes fixed on the towering Ferris wheel. A sense of dread filled the air as they realized they were witnessing the past, the tragic accident that had cursed the fairground. High above, one of the Ferris wheel carriages was swaying precariously. The bolts holding it in place had come loose, and the occupants were screaming for help. The fairground workers rushed to the scene, but it was too late. With a terrible final creak, the carriage broke free and plummeted to the ground, the screams of its occupants abruptly silenced. The scene faded, and the Carsons were back in the haunted house, the spectral figures surrounding them once more. "You must tell our story," the ringmaster said. "Only then can we find peace." The door to the room creaked open and the family stumbled out, the weight of the ghostly plea heavy on their shoulders. The Fairground was no longer the vibrant, inviting place it had seemed. It was a place of sorrow and lost souls, and they were now part of its tragic legacy. As they made their way back to the Ferris wheel, still determined to uncover the truth, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the spirits of the past were guiding them towards the answers they sought. The Fairground had revealed its dark secret, but the Carson family's ordeal was far from over. The Carsons emerged from the haunted house, shaken but resolute. The Fairground, once a beacon of light and joy, now seemed cloaked in shadows. Determined to uncover the truth behind the tragic accident and free the restless spirits, they moved cautiously through the eerie Fairground. "Let's stick together," Mark said, glancing around nervously. "We need to find more clues." Emily and Jack nodded, their faces pale but determined. The family continued their exploration, eventually arriving at a large, imposing building labeled House of Horrors. The facade was decorated with grotesque statues and dark, menacing figures. The air grew colder as they approached, and a sense of foreboding washed over them. "Do we really have to go in there?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "We have to keep looking," Sarah said, trying to sound reassuring. "It's the only way to understand what happened here." They stepped inside the House of Horrors, the door creaking shut behind them. The interior was dark and musty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and dust covering every surface. Dim, flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, and unsettling sounds echoed through the corridors. As they ventured further, they encountered a series of disturbing scenes. Wax figures of ghouls, monsters, and tortured souls were arranged in gruesome tableaux. The lifelike eyes of the figures seemed to follow the Carsons as they passed, adding to the growing sense of dread. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. The family froze, their hearts pounding. The scream was followed by a low, menacing growl, and the sound of something large and heavy moving in the darkness. "Stay close," Mark whispered, pulling Sarah and the kids closer. They pressed on, the atmosphere growing more oppressive with each step. As they turned a corner, they found themselves in a room filled with mirrors. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in reflective glass, creating a disorienting maze of endless reflections. "Careful," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the chamber. "Stay together, or we might get lost." Navigating the mirror maze proved challenging. The reflections seemed to multiply and distort, creating the illusion of countless shadowy figures moving around them. Every sound was amplified, every movement magnified, making it difficult to distinguish reality from illusion. As they made their way through the maze, Emily gasped, "Look, there's something in the mirrors!" The family turned to see what had caught her attention. In the reflection, they saw ghostly figures moving through the maze, their faces twisted in agony. The spectral forms reached out, their hands passing through the glass as if trying to escape their prison. "We need to get out of here," Mark said, his voice tight with fear. They hurried through the maze, the ghostly apparitions following their every move. The mirrors seemed to close in on them, the reflections growing more distorted and nightmarish. Just when they thought they were trapped, they stumbled upon an exit and burst out of the maze, gasping for breath. The next room was even more unsettling. It was designed to look like an old, decrepit carnival tent, with faded stripes and tattered banners. In the center of the room stood a large wooden box. The lid was partially open, revealing a glimpse of something dark and twisted inside. "We have to look," Jack said, his curiosity getting the better of him. Mark nodded, and together they approached the box. As they lifted the lid, they were greeted by a horrifying sight. Inside was a collection of old, rotting carnival props, including a clown's mask, a ringmaster's hat, and a stuffed animal with missing eyes. Among the items was a faded photograph of the Fairground workers, the same one they had seen in the haunted house. "This must be connected to the accident," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "We need to find out more." Suddenly, the door to the room slammed shut, and the lights flickered out. The Carsons were plunged into darkness, the air filled with the sounds of distant whispers and the faint, mournful cry of a child. A chilling presence seemed to envelop them, and they realized they were not alone. A voice, deep and filled with sorrow, echoed through the darkness. "You have seen our pain. You must help us find peace." The lights flickered back on, revealing the ghostly figure of a young girl standing before them. Her eyes were filled with tears, and her translucent form seemed to shimmer in the dim light. "Please," she whispered, "free us from this place." The family exchanged a glance, the resolve strengthening. They knew they couldn't leave until they had uncovered the full truth and found a way to break the curse. The haunted house had revealed more of the Fairground's dark past, but the true horror still lay ahead. With a renewed sense of purpose, they left the House of Horrors, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them next. The Fairground's secrets were slowly unraveling, and the Carson family was determined to see their quest through to the end. The Carson family stepped out of the House of Horrors, their hearts heavy with the burden of the spirit's sorrowful plea. The Fairground's once cheerful atmosphere now felt like a facade, hiding layers of pain and tragedy. As they made their way through the labyrinthine paths, they noticed a small, dimly lit tent with a sign that read, "Meet the Clown." Emily and Jack hesitated, but their curiosity got the better of them. "Let's go in," Jack suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark and Sarah exchanged glances, then nodded. "Stay close," Mark instructed, and they all stepped inside the tent. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with an eerie silence. The only light came from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, flickering shadows. In the center of the tent sat a clown on a wooden stool. His face was painted white, with exaggerated red lips and dark, sorrowful eyes that seemed to stare into the depths of their souls. "Welcome," the clown said, his voice a low, mournful drawl. "I am Lenny. I've been waiting for you." The family took a tentative step forward, unsure of what to expect. The clown's eyes never left them, and his presence seemed to fill the entire tent with a palpable sense of despair. "Why have you been waiting for us?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Lenny the clown sighed, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. "Because you are the first to truly see, the first to hear our cries for help." He gestured to a tattered old poster pinned to the wall behind him. It depicted a vibrant fairground bustling with life and laughter. Lenny stood at the center, surrounded by smiling faces. "This was once a place of joy," he began, his voice growing softer. "But everything changed on that fateful day." The Carson family leaned in, captivated by his sorrowful tale. "It was a perfect summer day just like today," Lenny continued. "The fairground was alive with excitement, but the Ferris wheel, it was old, poorly maintained. The owners knew, but they didn't care. Profits were all that mattered." He paused, his eyes filling with tears. "The carriage fell, and with it, the lives of those aboard. Innocent souls, including my daughter, were lost. We were all blamed, the workers, and the fairground was shut down. But the spirits of the departed couldn't move on. Their pain anchored us here, binding us to this cursed place." Emily and Jack clung to their parents, their eyes wide with horror. "Is there any way to help you?" Mark asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. Lenny nodded slowly, To break the curse, the truth must be known. The story must be told, and the Fairground sins acknowledged. Only then can the spirits find peace. The air grew colder, and the flickering bulb dimmed further, casting longer shadows around the tent. Lenny's figure seemed to waver, becoming almost translucent. "Remember," he said, his voice barely audible. "The past must be confronted, and justice must be served." The family backed away, their minds reeling with the weight of Lenny's words. As they exited the tent, they noticed a subtle change in the Fairground. The cheerful music had grown more discordant, the lights dimmer, and the atmosphere heavier with the presence of unseen watchers. Sarah clutched Mark's arm. "We have to tell people about this. We have to make them see." Mark nodded. "But first, we need to find more evidence. We need to understand exactly what happened and why." Determined to uncover the full truth and free the trapped souls, the Carsons set off towards the next attraction, the Mirror Maze. They knew their journey was far from over, and that the Fairground held many more secrets waiting to be revealed. The Carson family approached the Mirror Maze, its entrance framed by twisted wrought iron gates that seemed to shimmer ominously in the dim light. The structure itself was a labyrinth of reflective glass, creating an optical illusion of infinite corridors and dead ends. A sign above the entrance read, "Enter if you dare. Find yourself lost in reflection." "Stay close," Mark instructed, his voice firm. "It's easy to get disoriented in these places." As they stepped into the maze, the world around them fragmented into countless reflections. The walls of mirrors distorted their images, elongating and twisting their figures in unsettling ways. Each turn led to another corridor of mirrors, each reflection more unnerving than the last. "This place gives me the creeps," Emily whispered, gripping Sarah's hand tightly. "Just keep moving," Sarah replied, trying to sound reassuring despite the knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. They navigated the maze slowly, the disorienting reflections making it difficult to distinguish reality from illusion. The air grew colder with each step, and the sound of their footsteps echoed endlessly, creating an eerie symphony of whispers and faint murmurs. "Look," Jack said suddenly, pointing to one of the mirrors. "There's something different about this one." The family gathered around the mirror Jack indicated. Unlike the others, this mirror didn't reflect their images. Instead, it showed a scene from the past, a glimpse of the Fairground as it once was, bustling with life and joy. The Ferris wheel stood tall and proud, and children laughed as they rode the carousel. But as they watched, the scene shifted. The Ferris wheel began to shake, and the joyous atmosphere turned to panic. The carriage broke free, falling to the ground in a shower of sparks and screams. The image froze on the terrified faces of the riders, and a chill ran through the Carsons. "This is what Lenny was talking about," Mark said softly. "We're seeing the accident that cursed this place." As they moved away from the mirror, they noticed another anomaly. Reflected in the glass was a shadowy figure that didn't belong to any of them. It was tall and indistinct, its features obscured by darkness. The figure moved closer, its presence growing more oppressive with each passing second. "Who's there?" Mark called out, but there was no response. The shadowy figure remained in the mirrors, watching them silently. Panic set in as the family tried to find their way out of the maze. The reflections became more distorted, the corridors more labyrinthine. The shadowy figure seemed to multiply, appearing in every mirror they passed, its dark eyes fixed on them. "Over here!" Sarah called, spotting what looked like an exit. They rushed towards it, only to find themselves in another mirrored room. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the oppressive presence of the shadowy figure grew stronger. Emily whimpered, tears streaming down her face. "I want to go home." Mark hugged her tightly. "We'll find a way out. I promise." Desperation clawed at them as they stumbled through the maze. The mirrors now reflected not just their physical forms, but their deepest fears and insecurities. Each reflection taunted them with twisted visions of themselves, magnifying their terror. Finally, they found a door marked "Exit." They burst through it, collapsing onto the grass outside, gasping for breath. The oppressive presence vanished, leaving them shaken and exhausted. As they caught their breath, they realized they had emerged near the ghostly carousel they had seen earlier. The painted horses seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, their eyes gleaming with an eerie life. "We have to keep going," Mark said, helping Sarah and the children to their feet. "We need to find out more. The Fairground is revealing its secrets to us for a reason." They approached the carousel cautiously, aware that the Fairground was leading them deeper into its dark history. Each step brought them closer to understanding the curse that bound the spirits to this place, and they knew they couldn't stop now. The haunted Fairground had more stories to tell, and the Carson family was determined to uncover them all, no matter the cost. The Carson family stood before the ghostly carousel, its horses frozen in mid-gallop, their painted eyes glinting eerily in the moonlight. The music that usually accompanied such rides was absent, replaced by an unnatural silence that hung heavily in the air. "We have to ride it," Jack said, his voice trembling but resolute. "Lenny said we need to understand what happened here." Mark nodded, taking a deep breath. "All right, let's do this together." They climbed onto the carousel, each choosing a different horse. As soon as they settled into their places, the carousel creaked to life, moving slowly at first, then gaining speed. The lights around them flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the night. The carousel spun faster, and the world around them blurred into a whirl of colors and shapes. The eerie silence was broken by faint, ghostly whispers, growing louder with each rotation. The Carsons clung to the horses, their knuckles white with fear. Suddenly, the whispers coalesced into a single, mournful voice. "Help us! Free us!" The carousel's lights dimmed, and the surrounding fairground faded away, replaced by scenes from the past. The Carsons found themselves in the midst of a vibrant fairground, alive with laughter and joy. They saw the fairground workers they had encountered in the haunted house, their faces filled with happiness as they went about their work. But the joyous atmosphere quickly turned to horror. The scene shifted to the day of the tragic accident. The Ferris wheel loomed ominously in the background, its carriages swaying precariously. The Carsons watched in helpless terror as the bolts gave way and the carriage plummeted to the ground. The screams of the victims echoed through the air, and the Carsons could feel the horror and pain of the onlookers. They saw Lenny, the clown, rushing to the scene, his face twisted in grief as he cradled the lifeless body of his daughter. The scene shifted again, showing the aftermath of the accident. The fairground workers were blamed, their lives ruined by the tragedy. The fairground was closed, abandoned, and left to decay. The spirits of the victims and the workers who had been wrongfully accused were trapped, unable to move on. As the carousel slowed, the Carsons found themselves back in the present, the ghostly whispers still echoing in their ears. The carousel came to a halt, and the family dismounted, their hearts heavy with the weight of the past. "We need to tell people about this," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We need to clear their names and let everyone know what really happened." Mark nodded, his resolve strengthening. "But first, we need to find the ringmaster. He seems to be at the center of all this." The family moved away from the carousel, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. They knew they were getting closer to the heart of the mystery, but they also knew that the Fairground had more horrors in store for them. As they walked, the atmosphere grew colder, and the lights around them flickered ominously. They could feel the eyes of unseen watchers following their every move, and the sense of foreboding grew stronger. The Fairground seemed to be guiding them, leading them towards the ringmaster's tent. The large, striped tent loomed ahead, its entrance flanked by grotesque statues that seemed to come alive in the flickering light. The Carsons steeled themselves, knowing that they were about to confront the source of the Fairground's curse. They stepped inside, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. Inside the tent, the air was thick with a palpable sense of dread. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and the distant sound of carnival music played in a slow, haunting melody. In the center of the tent stood the ringmaster, his eyes glinting with a malevolent light. "Welcome," he said, his voice echoing through the tent. "I've been expecting you." The family stood their ground, determined to uncover the truth and break the curse. They knew they were about to face their greatest challenge yet, but they were ready. The Fairground's dark secrets were about to be revealed, and the Carson family was prepared to confront them head-on. The interior of the ringmaster's tent was an ominous blend of darkness and dim, flickering light. The walls were adorned with faded posters of past performances, each one featuring the ringmaster's imposing figure, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light. The air was thick with the scent of old canvas and the faint metallic tang of fear. The ringmaster stood in the center of the tent, his tall, slender frame draped in a red coat with gold epaulettes. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto the Carson family as they entered. He tipped his top hat in a mock gesture of welcome. "Ah, the Carsons," he said, his voice smooth and malevolent. "I've been waiting for you." Mark stepped forward, his fists clenched. "We know what happened here. We know about the accident and the innocent people who were blamed. We're here to set things right." The ringmaster's smile widened, but it did not reach his eyes. "Set things right? You think you can undo what has been done? The curse is powerful, and it binds us all to this place. But you have meddled too much in affairs that do not concern you." Sarah held Emily and Jack close, her eyes never leaving the ringmaster. "Those spirits deserve peace. You can't keep them trapped here forever." The ringmaster's expression darkened. "Peace? They will know no peace until my revenge is complete. You see, it was not just the accident that cursed this fairground. It was betrayal. I was wronged by those I trusted, and their treachery sealed their fates. Now, I ensure that all who come here pay the price." He waved his hand, and the tent seemed to come alive. Shadows moved independently, forming grotesque shapes that surrounded the family. The air grew colder, and the distant, mournful cries of the trapped spirits filled the tent. "You will join them," the ringmaster hissed. "Your meddling ends now." Mark looked around, searching for a way to fight back. "We won't let you win," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "There has to be a way to break this curse." The ringmaster laughed, a sound devoid of joy. "Break the curse? You are fools. But since you are so determined to try, I will give you a chance. Survive my trials, and perhaps you will find the answer you seek." With a flick of his wrist, the tent transformed into a twisted carnival of horrors. The family found themselves separated, each facing their own nightmare. Mark was thrust into a room filled with distorted mirrors, each one reflecting a different fear. He saw himself aging rapidly, withering away, and then becoming a monstrous figure. He had to navigate the maze of mirrors, confronting each fear head-on to find the exit. Sarah was in a room filled with life-sized marionettes, their wooden faces eerily lifelike. As she moved, the marionettes came to life, their movements jerky and unsettling. They surrounded her, whispering dark secrets and threatening to take her place. She had to find the strings controlling them and cut them loose. Emily and Jack found themselves in a dark forest, the trees twisted and gnarled. Strange creatures lurked in the shadows, and they could hear the distant howl of a wolf. They had to rely on each other, solving riddles and navigating the treacherous terrain to find their way back to their parents. Despite the terror and the obstacles, the Carsons fought bravely. Mark shattered the final mirror, dispelling the illusions. Sarah severed the strings, freeing herself from the marionettes. Emily and Jack, using their wits and bravery, found the path that led them out of the forest. Reunited, the family confronted the ringmaster once more. He watched them, a flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. "You are more resilient than I thought," he admitted. "But this is far from over." "Your revenge won't bring you peace," Sarah said. "It's time to let go." The ringmaster's expression softened for a brief moment, a look of profound sadness crossing his face. "Perhaps you are right," he said quietly. "But the curse cannot be broken so easily." Emily stepped forward, holding the faded photograph they had found earlier. "We know your story. We will tell everyone the truth. The Fairground can be restored, and your name cleared." The ringmaster stared at the photograph, his eyes filling with tears. "If you truly believe that," he whispered, "then perhaps there is hope." With a final wave of his hand, the tent dissolved, and the Fairground returned to its present state. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the trapped spirits began to fade, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. The Carson family stood in the middle of the Fairground, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. They knew their journey wasn't over. They had a story to tell, a wrong to right, and a Fairground to restore. As they walked away, the Fairground seemed less haunted, the shadows less menacing. The curse had begun to lift, and the spirits were finally finding peace. And so, with a sense of purpose and determination, the Carsons left the Fairground, ready to share their story with the world. The Carson family, their minds filled with the ringmaster's story and the visions they had witnessed, knew they had to act quickly. Dawn was breaking, but the Fairground's grip on them felt as strong as ever. They moved cautiously through the grounds, aware that the ringmaster's trials might not be the only obstacles they faced. "We need to find a way to document everything," Sarah said. "Photos, recordings, anything to prove what happened here." Mark nodded. "Let's head back to the car and get our phones. We need to gather evidence before we leave." As they made their way to the parking lot, the Fairgrounds seemed to resist their departure. The cheerful music returned, but it was warped and dissonant, echoing ominously in the early morning air. The lights flickered erratically, casting long, eerie shadows. The family reached their car and grabbed their phones, determined to capture as much evidence as possible. They began by taking photos of the attractions, the haunted house, the mirror maze, and the ghostly carousel. Each click of the camera felt like a step towards uncovering the truth. Emily and Jack used their phones to record the strange noises and whispers that still lingered in the air. "Listen," Jack said, holding his phone up to capture the faint, sorrowful voices. "We need to show people this." Sarah focused on taking detailed photos of the ringmaster's tent and the faded posters that adorned its walls. The once vibrant images of the Fairground workers seemed to come to life in the dim light, their faces reflecting the sorrow and pain of the past. Just as they were about to leave, The ringmaster appeared once more, his presence a dark silhouette against the rising sun. "You think you can escape so easily?" he sneered. "The curse is not so easily broken." Mark stepped forward, holding up his phone. "We have the evidence. We're going to tell your story. The world will know what happened here." The ringmaster's eyes glinted with a mix of anger and desperation. "You may have the evidence, but the Fairground will not let you go. The spirits are restless. They will not allow you to leave until you fulfill your promise." Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The Fairground seemed to come alive, the rides and attractions shifting and moving as if controlled by some unseen force. The Ferris wheel groaned and creaked, the carousel horses reared up, and the haunted house loomed ominously. "We need to get out of here now!" Sarah shouted, grabbing the children and running towards the exit. The family sprinted through the Fairground, dodging moving attractions and spectral figures that seemed to materialize out of the mist. The path twisted and turned, leading them through a nightmarish version of the Fairground they had once enjoyed. The mirror maze reappeared, its reflective surfaces distorting their images into grotesque shapes. The ghosts of the Fairground workers reached out, their hands passing through the glass, pleading for release. "You must help us," they whispered, their voices echoing in the maze. Desperation fueled the Carsons' flight. Mark led the way, his mind focused on finding an exit. They burst through the maze, the distorted reflections fading behind them. The haunted house loomed ahead, its doors creaking open as if inviting them inside. "No, we need to go around it," Mark shouted, steering the family away from the eerie structure. They navigated the twisting paths, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The Fairground seemed determined to trap them, but they pressed on, their determination unwavering. Finally, they saw the main gate ahead, the bright lights of the outside world shining through. Just as they reached the gate, the ringmaster appeared one last time, his eyes filled with fury. "You cannot leave! The curse will follow you!" Mark turned to face him. "We will break the curse. We will tell your story and bring justice to those who suffered here." The ringmaster's figure wavered, his expression shifting from anger to sorrow. "Then go," he whispered. "But remember your promise. Free us." With that, the ringmaster faded into the mist, and the gate swung open. The Carsons stumbled out of the Fairground, their hearts pounding with relief and determination. As they drove away, the Fairground receded into the distance, its twisted attractions and haunted grounds fading into the morning light. They knew their journey was far from over. They had a story to tell, evidence to share, and a curse to break. The Carsons vowed to return, armed with the truth and the determination to free the spirits trapped in the cursed Fairground. Their escape was only the beginning of their mission to uncover the secrets of the past and bring peace to those who had suffered for so long. The Carson family drove home in silence, the weight of their experience heavy on their minds. They knew they couldn't rest until the curse was broken and the spirits were free. As soon as they reached their house, they gathered in the living room, their phones and the evidence they had collected spread out on the coffee table. "We need to share this with someone who can help," Sarah said. "Someone who can get the word out and help us uncover the truth." Mark nodded. "I know just the person. A journalist friend of mine, Rebecca Collins. She loves investigating mysteries and has a wide reach. She'll believe us." He dialed Rebecca's number, and after a few rings, she picked up. "Mark, it's been a while. What's up?" "Rebecca, I have a story for you. A big one. It's about the old Fairground and a curse that's trapped the spirits of the people who died there. We have evidence. Photos, recordings, everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That sounds incredible. I'll come over right away." Within an hour, Rebecca arrived at their house. She listened intently as the Carsons recounted their harrowing experience, examining the photos and recordings with a keen eye. "This is unbelievable," she said, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and disbelief. "If what you're saying is true, this could be the story of a lifetime." "It is true," Mark insisted. "We need your help to bring this to light and break the curse." Rebecca nodded. "We'll start by publishing an article and sharing the evidence. We'll also need to dig into the history of the Fairground and find any records or witnesses that can corroborate your story." Over the next few days, Rebecca and the Carsons worked tirelessly. They pored over old newspapers, contacted local historians, and interviewed former Fairground workers. Slowly, the pieces of the puzzle began to come together. They discovered that the Fairground owners had indeed ignored safety warnings, leading to the tragic accident. They also found evidence that the workers had been wrongfully blamed to protect the owner's reputation. Rebecca's article went live, complete with the Carsons' evidence and the historical findings. It quickly gained traction, spreading across social media and news outlets. People were shocked and intrigued by the story, and many expressed their desire to see justice served. The renewed attention on the Fairground drew the interest of local authorities, who reopened the investigation into the accident. The Fairground owners, long retired and thought to be beyond reproach, were brought in for questioning. The truth of their negligence and the subsequent cover-up was exposed, and they faced legal repercussions for their actions. But the Carsons knew that justice in the present wasn't enough to break the curse. They had to perform one final act to bring peace to the spirits trapped in the Fairground. They returned to the Fairground one last time, armed with the knowledge of the past and a plan to set things right. As they stepped through the gates, the Fairground seemed to hold its breath, the oppressive atmosphere lighter but still palpable. The family made their way to the center of the grounds, where the Ferris wheel and the carousel stood silent and still. "We need to address the spirits directly," Mark said. "Acknowledge their suffering and let them know justice has been served." The family held hands, forming a circle. Mark spoke first, his voice strong and clear. "To the spirits trapped here, we have uncovered the truth. The ones responsible for your pain have been held accountable. We seek to honor your memory and bring you peace." Sarah continued, her voice filled with compassion. "We understand your suffering, and we promise to ensure your story is remembered. You were wronged, but you are not forgotten." Emily and Jack, their voices trembling but determined, added their own messages of peace and hope. "We're here to help you move on," Emily said. "You don't have to stay here anymore." The air around them seemed to shimmer, and the figures of the Fairground workers and the accident victims began to appear, their faces filled with a mix of sorrow and relief. Lenny the clown stepped forward, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. "You've done what no one else could." The spirits began to fade, their forms becoming less distinct as they moved towards the light that now bathed the Fairground. The oppressive atmosphere lifted entirely, replaced by a sense of peace and closure. As the last of the spirits disappeared, the Fairground transformed. The once decaying structure seemed to regain some of their former glory, and the oppressive silence was replaced by a gentle breeze carrying the faint echoes of past laughter. The Carsons stood in the middle of the Fairground, tears in their eyes but smiles on their faces. They had done it. They had broken the curse and brought peace to the spirits trapped for so long. Rebecca, who had accompanied them, recorded the entire event. She turned to the family, her face alight with amazement. "This is beyond incredible. The world needs to hear this." And so the story of the cursed Fairground and the Carson family's bravery spread far and wide. The Fairground was eventually restored and reopened, not as a place of horror, but as a memorial to those who had suffered and a testament to the power of truth and justice. The Carson family returned to their normal lives, forever changed by their experience. They knew they had done something extraordinary, something that would be remembered for generations. And as they looked back on the fairground, now a place of peace and remembrance, they felt a deep sense of fulfillment and pride. The curse had been broken and the fairground was finally free.